On this episode of Wardocs, retired Air Force Colonel Dr. Eric Flake shares his journey into military medicine, focusing on his specialization in developmental behavioral pediatrics. He discusses the critical role pediatricians play in both deployed environments and at home, emphasizing the importance of innovative care models for neurodiverse children. Dr. Flake highlights the significance of technology and telehealth in enhancing care delivery, as well as the need for collaborations with civilian institutions. He advocates for military families and the health of military children, sharing memorable cases and lessons learned throughout his career. Looking to the future, he expresses excitement about the potential of AI in pediatrics and the ongoing need for advocacy and support for military families. For further information about Dr. Flake and our previous guests, visit our website, wardocspodcast.com, and be sure to follow Wardocs on your preferred podcast platform and subscribe to our Wardocs YouTube channel. I'm your host, Dr. Doug Soderdahl, retired Army urologist.
Welcome to Wardocs, the military medicine podcast. This show brings you a firsthand, behind-the-scenes look into the mission, unique opportunities, and deployed experiences of the entire military healthcare team. From state-of-the-art hospitals in the United States to the most austere environments across the globe, Wardocs has you covered.
Today, we're privileged to welcome retired Air Force Colonel Dr. Eric Flake to Wardocs. Eric, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Hey, tell us what initially drew you to pursue a career in military medicine. And once you got in, you went to USUS, Uniformed Services University. And how did that shape your decision to specialize in pediatrics and, subspecialize in developmental behavioral peds?
I think, like many of us, we dream of serving our country, having a certain measure of patriotism and desire to pay it forward. I felt like that was something that was offered in military medicine. I knew from an early age that I was interested in medicine, and even go back to some old journals and discussions about what do you want to do when you grow up? Well, I want to be a doctor. Did I necessarily see myself as a doctor wearing the uniform? Not at that time. But to me, I've always been interested in the win-win. There was a time that I spent some experience overseas, and that really drew me towards the military, is not only the service, but some of the overseas experience and the ongoing opportunities that the military medicine provides that's outside of the normal of just what a civilian physician or pediatric practice would be.
How did you even hear about USUS? When I was going through it, I don't even think I even knew that existed.
No, that's interesting that you bring that up. I think it highlights a bigger component. When you go up and down the road, you don't see billboards about military doctors, kind of like you do for your local civilian hospital, as they're promoting. The military doesn't really promote that. I was fortunate to have an uncle in the Army who spoke up about USUS and the university military experience. I also, it was something that a lot of individuals from my university had gone to and had very favorable responses. And I'll tell you, when you go and interview at the medical school there, it's quite impressive. So it really leaves an impression on you after you're going through that medical vetting process to determine the medical school you're interested in.
Tell me a little bit more about the role that a developmental behavioral pediatrician plays in the military field, and maybe a pivotal moment in your career where you realize that this actually is a critical mission specialty.
It's not one you would think of quite so when you're thinking of all the operational requirements of a military medical doctor. Often you're thinking MASH or people on the front lines and requiring those type of support. So as you can readily see, that a developmental behavioral pediatrician likely wouldn't be that person you'd want on the front lines to help with the surgical case. But there's definitely a particular readiness impact that developmental peds provides. And there's not very many of us in the country overall, but I would like to highlight that the military does place an emphasis on this particular specialty in pediatrics, primarily because of the impact it has on the families and their ability to be supported and located in certain places that wouldn't otherwise be able to be supported if there wasn't developmental behavioral care. Now, what is that developmental pediatrician? It's an individual that spends more time after their general pediatric training focused on providing specific care for children with long-term or complicated neurological and developmental and behavioral problems. Some of those that most common are known as ADHD or autism spectrum disorder. Others are kids that are impacted by in utero alcohol or drug exposure. And sometimes there are even others that are complicated from delivery complications or kids who have different malformations and difficulties. It is interesting that way back in the 70s, when the Exceptional Family Member Program was stood up, or a program for overseas care for military families who have children with these complex challenges called EDIS, those were stood up near after the American Disabilities Act was rolled out. There was a lot more emphasis and training on setting up developmental teams that consisted of a developmental pediatrician and then having support staff that are able to provide them the services or the support that families needed. Often those included an occupational therapy, a speech pathologist, a social worker. Now, developmental peds are kind of the residual force of that. Most of the speech pathology occupational therapists aren't active duty for children. They're primarily outsourced or contracted. But it still has a tremendous impact on military families and the children that we serve.
So tell me about the role of a pediatrician in a deployed environment. And, can you give me any examples of the things that you might see? I was amazed in my own career being deployed a couple times, the amount of kids we saw. I mean, it was amazing to me. That was the last thing I expected. And probably the thing that most surprised me was that our combat surgical hospital or combat support hospital had so many kids admitted.
Well, we have lots of missions, and obviously the primary one is caring for the warfighter, but often there's humanitarian and ongoing casualties that happen to children or host nation who are allies that want services and support for their children. And you're right. In some cases, it was as high as a third of children in intensive care units being cared for at some of those forward operating places. I'll tell you, our pediatricians were very active during the global war on terror, with many of them providing pediatric support. But you'd also be interested to know that we're kind of a pretty good utility knife as well. We can provide support to older children, which are often younger service members, if you consider the main age being 17 to 21-year-olds. That's not extensive. I'd like to think that there's many of us that are still children at heart, despite how old we become. And there's quite a few leadership roles that pediatricians are able to provide in those forward operating settings. And so there is a critical component that pediatricians not only help with the families, but they do have direct support and care for the warfighter, especially those that have some particular training, whether it's intensive care or adolescent medicine in those particular regards. But they also fit very well into the battalion, the brigade surgeon role, as well as the flight surgeon component, which quite a few, you'd be surprised by the numbers of those positions are filled by pediatricians.
Now, you mentioned intensive care. Is there an ability in the military to subspecialize like you did in other areas and do fellowships and specialty training in pediatrics?
It is one of the fantastic things, Doug, about the military is how much they do promote that ongoing training and kind of sharpening your saw, if you will. So it's a highly sought after thing that happens either after training, or often people will go out and do general pediatrics for a few years, recognize that they like a particular part of pediatrics, and then be able to reapply into a subspecialty. But all of the services provide that either within the direct military medical education system which I was able to do. There was a developmental behavioral fellowship at Madigan Army Medical Center at Joint Base Lewis McChord, Washington. And or if those are not available, then often you go to some of the premier training locations in around the country. And we have quite a good reputation, and very often those locations are very open and desiring us to come and train at their facilities due to the ongoing support that we provide during training, but then the reputation that we maintain after that training.
So let's talk some about your particular experience. You've pioneered several innovative care models for neurodiverse children within the military community. Can you talk a little bit about the motivation behind creating the Center for Autism Resources and Education and Services at, Madigan or Joint Base Lewis McChord up in the Northwest?
I've really appreciated my time in the military service. I think it helps foster innovation, and I don't think I'm the only physician or pediatrician that have been able to come up with innovative solutions to different challenges. For this one in particular that you highlighted, the Joint Base Lewis McChord Center for Autism Resources, Education, and Services, which is CARES for short, we really wanted to let military families know, especially during times of higher operation tempo, that we care as pediatricians, as physicians, about their families. And we want to also provide hope for them. And so it was kind of embedded in the name. The intent of this innovation, as you may be aware, there's been a high increase in the diagnosis and the incidence and prevalence of autism, and sometimes some challenges that families have resulted as this supply and demand doesn't match up of services being able to be provided for families who have a child with autism. So with leadership support, it required some outside the box type of thinking, and all the way up the chain within the Army system, we were allowed to set up an autism center that was intended to bring families in as they newly moved to this area or had new diagnosis of autism. And not only was this supposed to influence here, but we had the hopes and aspirations that these type of models would be supported at other bases. And so you could jump from one CARES facility to another and be able to provide the autism resources that families need. Now, often this was intended to be able to support them until they got settled. And then once they got settled, we would help them get integrated into the community and the community resources that were available there. This has been highly successful, and we started in 2017. So you can see we're now almost nearing 10 years of this impact in this area, and there have been other bases that are intent on expanding this as well. But it requires an entire community to wrap around. And one of the beautiful things about this is it brought the garrison together. It brought support services and medical all kind of under a single umbrella and really had a spirit of collaboration. What brought this about was the result that there were some families that were not able to come to Joint Base Lewis McChord to meet the mission requirements due to, at the time, a lack of resources. And so we were not providing those resources for families that were already here. We were struggling with accepting new families. And this JBLM Cares, if you will, kind of smoothed out that transition process for which we've been able to accept families since that 2017 point without any hesitation in having them come and get their orders here to be able to continue to meet the mission.
And so that CARES opportunity, and I always have to mention that the military always has to have their own acronyms for everything. So congratulations on CARES. That's a nice one. So there's CARES areas across the globe or across the nation that will work with regional places?
So CARES primarily is only here at JBLM. We basically took a CARES model and made it mobile. And by making it mobile, set up more of a regional hub and spoke type of opportunity So if you imagine CARES 2.0, we went from that initial concept to support families to then have of a more mobile team. And those teams, we got initial support and funding from the Air Force and highlighted them as developmental behavioral family readiness centers. And so those centers are now across the globe. CARES is primarily something that's probably better set if you're thinking brick and mortar. It has a building where a high concentration of families in order to support them. Now, it could be made onto a smaller scale, but again, it's been ideal for this facility due to the fact that there's almost 40,000 children in our area that we would be supporting. Not all of them have a need for CARES, but that's the overall size of the military population, children and family that are here.
And I think that's such an important point of emphasizing that how that can really support readiness, because the family is so, I mean, the service member, it has enough to be concerned about, and having their kids and their family taken care of in a professional manner just takes that burden off them and really increases their readiness.
We've tried for decades to reach that bar. I think that there's still a lot we can do. I do think the best in the interim is to send that message of how much we do care and how much hope we have for their family, and wanting to support them so that when they do deploy or go to training exercises, that they know that their family can be cared for, but then they also have a relationship with some local experts to be able to provide that service. In the regional sense, often there's not many of us, so how do we extend our influence? Fortunately, with some of the telehealth opportunities and some periodic visits to some of the more smaller bases, those families at those places can also receive similar resources and services. Again, even if there's not a building like there is here at JBLM.
Yeah, that's really where I wanted to go next is, given your role with the Henry Jackson Foundation and the Universal Services University, how do you see technology, you mentioned telehealth, transforming the way you can provide care, especially in the military, considering the frequent relocations, deployments, they're scattered everywhere. You have to rely on some new technology.
We do. It is interesting because I think there's different generations of physicians that are all currently practicing. I remember not so long ago, pre-COVID, we had talked to developmental pediatricians about doing tele-evaluations and tele-assessments for autism or other types of neurodevelopmental conditions. And many of those that had been practicing for 20, 30 years couldn't visualize or conceptualize doing that through a camera. Couldn't. However, we then learned that sometimes there's some advantages of seeing a child in their natural environment, a child who is at home and comfortable and interacting with them, or encouraging a parent on how to do that. It became very rich information when you could see the environment in which they're in, and a lot of families would have to travel quite far, so it was also a barrier for access. With the Henry Jackson Foundation, what I think is fantastic is they look for ways of being able to do this in a high quality, effective manner. So how can we take some of these new models and demonstrate what is the best practice, and trying to determine when is it best to try and encourage somebody to see them in person? What information can we get from virtual telehealth type of opportunities? I think there's a lot of times, at least from my experience in the military, of us trying to move something forward, implement a program, but actually measuring the outcome of that program. That's really where I'm excited to be part of the Henry Jackson Foundation, because now they have a whole research team that is, again, in conjunction with the Uniformed Services University, as they work hand in glove to now look at these implementations of programs that we've done, whether it's assessing a child with autism virtually and determining how best and safe to effective to do that with certain qualitative and quantitative measures.
So you mentioned, the work of the Uniform Services University and Henry Jackson. Autism diagnosis incidence has gone up, as we know, in this country. How do you collaborate with civilian institutions and organizations to really, kind of tackle similar problems of how do you provide care for a larger group of patients?
I think this is a great question. Thanks for asking it, because often we learn from other universities or civilian models or other medical models, whether they're large medical centers that are similar to TRICARE, like the Kaiser Permanente groups, or universities that are also tackling these challenging questions. With regards to autism in particular, there's a lot of models and innovation that we are identifying as a result of caring for our families worldwide, that the civilian community is looking for us for answers on how to move forward in certain maybe treatment ways for children identified and diagnosed with autism, as well as how to support families who are happy in their neurodiversity and just want to know what it is that what their needs are and how we can support them. One of the things that I look forward to and continues to happen is how do we continue to collaborate with local universities who often have resources to be able to support our military families, and how do we again synergize both the on-base services like JBLM Cares and the off-base treatment options that historically have been there for military families in order to have a synergistic experience for the military.
Really, from what I'm hearing, it seems like the success in providing excellent care is cultivating a culturally sensitive, multidisciplinary team. The military is a melting pot, and you see folks from all different kinds of backgrounds. What strategies have you found effective in fostering that kind of environment, especially within the diverse military community?
I think it's important to bring up just how value it is to have that diversity and that ability to look at being, I guess, culturally aware of the military nuances. I often believe, from an individual that's worn the uniform for 25 plus years, that how we were perceived by our community isn't always how we see them perceiving us. So sometimes there does take some education about what our needs are and how to foster better collaboration between community and our military community. I think it often comes down to a lot of leadership and thinking forward and advocating, but also thinking of creating an environment that's more of a win-win, that's beneficial to those that want to serve and support our service needs and our military families. But then how do we also articulate what those are? And I often think also in a multidisciplinary or a multicultural way, you're thinking of how the sum of the whole is often greater than the individual parts. So we end up doing this synergy and coming together and ultimately, again, elevating not only the family, but by elevating the family, you're elevating the service member, and by elevating them, you're elevating our whole community. That's where I think it kind of comes down to. And if we're able to foster those type of experiences, not only just in every individual base, but I think as we move that forward, we foster it for our entire community.
So you mentioned 25 years, wearing the uniform. Were there any specific cases that were memorable to you that you said, wow, that was just an amazing case and it changed how I practiced, or I learned a lesson that I'd love to share? Any particular, clinical things from your experience?
Oh man, I think of a young man as a resident that demonstrated some developmental challenges. He had what's called brittle bone disease or osteogenesis imperfecta. And to see him and his mom, who was now widowed from the service member, getting through life and working through everything they could, and just the impact that a little bit extra effort in caring about them made. And then I also highlight one of the most rewarding things of what we do, especially as pediatrics, is being able to see children learn and grow. And I guess I would really celebrate the love and compassion that the parents have for those individual children. I brought up that young man for an example of thousands of others that I've seen come into clinic. Those parents, I can only imagine the sleepless nights or the ongoing medical appointments that they've gone to. And they're doing that in addition to the same time that they're serving and kind of in defending our country. My hat goes off to all of those families that care for children and continue to meet the mission as well.
So in your career, you've kind of filled the roles of clinician, researcher, educator. What kind of synergy and balance do you find amongst these roles? And how do you use that to advance pediatric care and other kind of care in the military and civilian sector?
I've always considered that maybe there's a danger in being trying to develop in all three of those roles versus just hyper focusing on one versus the other. But I kind of believe that there is a synergy and that there's an opportunity as many of us are growing and developing ourselves of this lifelong learning. And I've always had that mentality of get busy living and, take advantage of what the day has to offer for you. And so there's a need for individuals to be clinicians, researchers, and educators. And interestingly enough, in medicine, and especially in military medicine, there's the opportunity to do all three of them, and they end up complementing each other. Often that does take a little bit of sacrifice in certain aspects. There also is the ability to kind of also determine how those roles fit within a military system and how do you adjust some of those drives to meet the need of the mission. But I also think that there's this ongoing development in each of these areas to be a better leader in all three of those components, both the clinician, a researcher, and educator. And it really comes to fruition when you're able to see impact happen for those families that deserve this so much.
One of the things you mentioned earlier is one of the missions that military pediatricians have involves humanitarian missions and global health, kind of education and other initiatives in that realm. To me, those are just unbelievable ways to spread goodwill and good health, but also, strengthen our national security. How those global health experiences shape your approach to pediatric care within the military context?
I think it's fantastic that our nation's leaders recognize the value in providing some of those humanitarian outreaches. I've myself have been able to go to various humanitarian experiences in other countries and provide those goodwill gestures along with our dental and our optometrists and OBGYN as far as continue teams. Even at some points, we've had surgeons that have provided some of these global health opportunities. I think particularly for pediatrics, and especially as we continue to develop as a community, there's going to be ongoing drive to how do we support our nation's children as there's fewer and fewer of them, and how do we provide high quality services and support at a low cost that are often parent directed or parent supported, and how do we do this without requiring a heavy footprint, if you will. And I think those are very similar to other humanitarian missions that have been done in the past. But the idea of global health that comes forward not only in pediatrics, but just the military itself in their global health initiatives, I think are bar none some of the top of the line. And many pediatricians go on and become global health specialists to be able to expand that knowledge that they have that started as pediatricians and then be able to broaden it even further to our global health community.
So let's talk about, specifics at home. You've been involved with the American Academy of Pediatrics. You've been involved with the Military Child Education Coalition. How do you advocate for policy changes that not only benefit, the specialty that you're in, neurodevelopmental challenges, but just the health of children in our nation? What are you doing to help us get more healthy children?
I appreciate there's organizations that are 100% dedicated to that mission. The American Academy of Pediatrics is one, and in particular, for military children, the Military Child Education Coalition focuses worldwide on military children and their development. I also appreciate the other nonprofit or individuals that advocate on a daily basis for improving the lives of our military children. Not only those with neurodevelopmental challenges, but those that definitely just need a little bit of help and support and a reminder of what they can do to help their child develop. Sometimes I think we take for granted what happened to us growing up and recognize that sometimes there's distractions these days that didn't happen historically that are getting in the way of sometimes kids having a healthy development and growth. I honestly don't feel like I do enough, but I do appreciate that what little I could do to be able to help and serve in these capacities. I know it's probably come across during this conversation that I would say one of my top passions is to care for military children and to be a voice for them in reminding policymakers or individuals that are making decisions to not forget the children and to remember that they are quickly growing up, as I think we can look at our own children, how fast they grow and quickly become our service members of tomorrow and our leaders of tomorrow as well. I do think that there are some really big things that have happened. The parental and maternal leave policies, as well as additional considerations towards how do we help continue to support families and help them establish good, healthy attachments throughout their lifetime.
So, looking into your crystal ball, what are the next frontiers in military medicine for developmental behavioral pediatrics? And what excites you the most, and maybe what keeps you up at night or concerns you?
Well, it's interesting thinking. Everyone's talking about artificial intelligence and what learning models or machine based learning has to offer, and thinking about what that will do for developmental pediatrics. I often think of a future instead of writing out a consult, of being able to take a video or a short little live picture of a child and be able to submit that referral that way, and as well as showing your developmental concerns, and then having the families upload some videos or some images to be able to collect some information about how the child behaves in certain ways, and providing better objective measures. As you may appreciate, mental health and developmental diagnoses often they're pretty subjective to the person who's viewing it. And if you are somebody making a diagnosis, and if you're looking at the glass being half full or half empty, it may influence your diagnosis. Or sometimes also in mental health, we end up adding or stacking diagnoses to families as they see different providers, and that can lead to some confusion and some ambiguity as far as what exactly is impacting that child. And so I was hoping that technology would have the ability to clarify some of that information, providing some objective tools in a better measure to be able to complement some of our clinical impressions, if you will. I'd like to see some of that come down the pike, or be available. I don't want people to think that I'm at all advocating that a machine should be able to diagnose autism, for example. I think that information could help complement and solidify our ability to make that diagnosis and provide more clarity, especially with the intent that later, as individuals progress or develop, we could have points in time that can continue to measure progress and determine what interventions are effective versus not. And I really think and hope that this is something that we're able to see in that future. And I think it's possible. Again, sometimes funding and initiative and innovation take a little bit more time, but those are my hopes for our future.
In your role with Henry M. Jackson, where are their resources allocated? What are you kind of aiming at right now to get after in this space?
Oh, great question. I think one of the impressive things that Henry Jackson Foundation has is with regards to a kind of a machinery, if you will, to be able to recognize what grants are available or who's interested in looking into this space, and then be able to take team members, part of HJF, to move forward and get grant applications accepted, and then actually put forward some of those clinical implementations. That is one of the opportunities that I have currently, is due to some congressional funding, able to provide some qualitative and quantitative opportunities of looking at the impact of children with neurodevelopmental challenges, and in particular fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, across our enterprise. And how do we help support those families with those particular needs? And the other component that being part of a larger research lab provides is, now you're looking on the horizon for when an AI type of opportunity or collaboration happens between universities. For example, there was some recent communication between a land grant university and the Uniformed Services University, or other ones that come out, or the congressionally directed medical research programs, or the CDMRP opportunities that call for looking for more information with regards to these particular questions, as these particular military specific ones have come out in the past about autism, or looking at the impact of deployment on military children. And the Henry Jackson Foundation, in conjunction with the Uniformed Services University, are well poised to be able to capitalize on that, as well as bring in other universities to highlight additional resources.
So we have some young folks that listen to the show. What advice would you give to them about, maybe considering a career in military medicine in any capacity, based on, what you've experienced?
I'm glad they're listening in. I think just the fact alone that they're interested keeps them, with my advice, number one, is going in with your eyes wide open, because there are so many opportunities for learning, for development, for leadership, that happen all within this military construct. My daughter, who's interested in medicine, and due to my experience, is also considering the military due to some of the positive experiences that I had. I think that one of the things that we continue to struggle with is sometimes flexibility in profession. Again, that's something to keep in mind. If you can be flexible and you're able to do a full-time work and enjoy this career of being able to serve your country at the same time meeting your own personal and developmental goals, then the military is a great career, as well as, not only does it happen while you're in uniform, but I do feel like, as we talk to many veterans, it continues to be a part of who you are and your identity throughout your life. And not only you, but your family, that experience this along with you. And a lot of it ends up being what you make of it. But I would highly encourage anyone listening to seriously consider this as part of their journey.
So when the history books are written 100 years from now, how would you want your legacy in military medicine to be recorded?
You want to be remembered probably not necessarily in the way is that often is done with a statue or is done other ways. I think if people take for granted or expect high quality care of military children in the future, and they're receiving that because of some small thing that I or others could have done, then it's great that they're enjoying the shade from the seed that was planted. I guess for me, I just want to always be remembered as someone who had a passion and cared for military children. It's kept me awake at night. It wakes me up early in the morning. It keeps me moving. As I've done that with my might, mind, and strength, and it continues to kind of fill up my gas tank to continue to do it forward. I do think that there's an opportunity and a privilege and sometimes a calling to be a voice for those who can't speak for themselves. That's really moved me forward to try to be the best leader and advocate that I could be, and try to live that virtue both at home and my profession. And I'd like to invite others to continue to grab that guidon and that flag and move it forward, because we need every one of us to continue to procure a healthy future for our children of today, for them to have it tomorrow.
We've been speaking with Dr. Eric Flake on Wardocs podcast. Eric, thanks again for sharing your experiences and insights with us, and thank you for your service to this nation. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. I really appreciate being a part of this. It was really, really commendable to recognize that you could have lots of individuals on this podcast for you, but recognizing a role that pediatricians and pediatrics can have in our military service is something that I appreciate you highlighting.
All right. Well, thanks again.
Thank you for listening to Wardocs. We sure hope you enjoyed it. Wardocs is a nonprofit organization supported by donations from listeners like you. Please follow and subscribe to our show on whatever platform you consume your podcasts, and rate and review this episode, and share the show with your contacts on social media. Find out more information about our show, our guests, and how to become a member of Team Wardocs on wardocspodcast.com. Thank you for your support. If you like war stories and medical drama, Wardocs has you covered. Spread the word.